Welcome to Convergence. My name's Michael Dorn. I'm a California attorney. Albert Einstein said among the most difficult problems in all of physics is Earth's magnetic field. I believe it's the most difficult problem in all of biology. And as I said in a prior episode, it's kind of like when Kasparov, the chess champion, played Big Blue, a supercomputer, and actually beat the computer, tied the computer, and lost the computer, but still managed to compete against the supercomputer. And what he said at the time was that he was able to beat a computer with almost infinite amount of calculative transactions because he knew the programming of the computer. He knew that the computer considered, say, a rook worth 5 points, a bishop 2.5, a horse or a knight worth 2.5, queen 10, and as the pawns further advance, then they're worth more. And the same sort of thing is going on here when we talk about a living Earth, that we will understand how to be stewards of the planet by having a basic understanding of what the rudimentary programming of the Earth is. And so that's kind of where I want to start. I have a brother who's done human genome research and was involved with that project, and I got a chance to hang out with him in his lab. He worked at the Heart and Lung Institute at the University of Minnesota, and he dissected a mouse live and gave it a shot of barbiturate and cut out its heart, dropped it into some liquid nitrogen, and did some biochemical stuff. And I don't want to get into some of the details of some of this stuff, but again, the idea is to explain what the basic programming is, so that, again, there's an understanding of how there's this connection between the Earth's magnetic field and life. So what happens when you're sequencing for DNA, you put the tissue in a centrifuge and you separate out the nucleotides. You amplify them so your sample of the nucleotides is bigger, and then you color it, and you put this concoction in a gel. And here's the most important part. In the gel, there's an electrical field. There's an anode and a cathode end. And then what you see at the end of it is banding, these strips that are unique for the chemical pattern of nucleotides that you have. So how in the world does that relate? Well, it relates to how the nucleotides became ordered in the first place, and that is in clouds. There is a paper that just came out, and it's, well, not just came out. It was first published in New Scientist on October 30, 2013, and it asks this question. So you have reporters of a scientific paper in something like New Scientist, which is more of a popular piece, and then you have an underlying paper that supported the article, and a scientific periodical. And here I am, almost 9 years later, talking to you about the convergence of technology coming together to be significant to the public. So it's kind of interesting how different things get interpreted, and the problem is having an ability to translate these technical papers and so forth to why it's important for us to understand this and what this has to do with the Earth's magnetic field. And again, the underlying problem is that if the Earth's magnetic field is too strong, it captures dust and gas and materials from space, and pretty soon you have a hothouse. And if the Earth's magnetic field is too weak, the atmosphere gets stripped away by solar winds and by space weather and so forth, and you get Mars. So the atmosphere is just right over huge time scales in terms of the magnetic field. That's an implausible complexity. It can't happen by chance. This is where life stepped in and was able to dampen the condition and literally change the Earth's magnetic field, and why I'm sitting here talking to you about it. So what this paper, which was reported in the New Scientist, was talking about was Earth's first life may have sprung up in ice. It goes, if you thought life evolved in bubbling hot springs, think again. Pieces of RNA have been made that can copy RNA strands longer than themselves, supporting the idea that the first life was based off self-replicating RNA, not DNA. What's more, they work best in cold, hinting that life began in ice. RNA is a jack of all trades. Like DNA, it can store genetic material, but it also can catalyze chemical reactions. For this reason, many believe it was the basis for first life. If this is the case, from those early organisms must have had the enzyme created out of RNA copy from their RNA genomes. But it's known that RNA enzyme can copy a stretch of RNA as long as itself, without which RNA organisms couldn't have survived for long. So it goes on and talks about how this particular idea that RNA came in ice was from the scientific article in Nature Chemistry. And Hollinger, who was one of the authors, was interviewed, and he asked, he stated that the creation in ice makes it he goes one step further. It makes an RNA big enough to encode itself. There's no reason why self-replication couldn't occur. The RNA's effectiveness at cold temperatures suggests that ice was crucial to the first life. When a mixture of RNA and metals ions freezes, growing ice crystals suck up the water, leaving tiny pockets of RNA and concentrated salt. RNA replication can happen in these pockets. They're a little bit like artificial cells, said Hollinger, and could be where evolution started. Now, I remember when I was a kid, my mom at a prayer meeting was reading a book by a scientist, a biologist who is not was a Christian, who was not an evolutionist, and he was making this argument that of implausible complexity, and he said that the chance of first light coming together by random chance was the same as a printing press blowing up and a fully unabridged dictionary coming out of the explosion. The processes that we're talking about are not randomized like that. What we're talking about is a purpose that the nucleotides had, and that is, in water that's supercooled in clouds, the nucleotide material could be both a model and a feedback, and this is where it's critical. So if if the model, the nucleotide that's in this frozen droplet, is a correct answer to modulate or dampen the Earth's magnetic field in the correct way, in other words, a cloud behavior that occurred when you had this whole solution set of nucleotides brought back a positive, maybe positive is not the right word, a correct feedback, then those nucleotides would survive and were both a calculating model and also a feedback at the same time. And so that is how you kind of go from this continuum of lifeless chemistry to chemistry that actually is complicated enough to solve the problem, and then grows more complicated with time, to the point where you can't really tell what is lifeless chemistry and what is life. It's kind of like that joke, an amoeba is simple life, now try to make one. It's actually incredibly complex. And a lot of nucleotides serve no apparent function in other words, the nucleotides don't seem to have a function for the cell or for the organism that we're talking about. But I'm talking about a totally different function where the nucleotides were part of this solution set of the Earth's magnetic field. Now, pardon me. So what this paper is doing is it's, and let me get to the actual scientific, it's from Nature Chemistry. It was published on October 20, 2013, and the authors are listed as James Atwater and Nelia Wachner and Philip Willinger, and I'm butchering those names, I'm sorry. The abstract says, mechanisms of molecular self-replication have the potential to shed the light on the origins of life. In particular, self-replication through RNA-catalyzed templated RNA synthesis is thought to have supported primordial RNA world. However, existing polymerase ribosines lack the capacity to synthesize RNAs approaching their own size. Here we report in vitro evolution of such catalysts directly in RNA stabilizing medium of water ice, which yields RNA polymerase ribosomes specifically adapted to sub-zero temperatures and able to synthesize RNA and ices at temperatures as low as minus 19 Celsius. A combination of cold adaptive mutations with previously described 5 extension operating at ambient temperatures enable the design of the first polymerase ribosine, again I'm butchering that, capable of catalyzing the accurate synthesis of RNA sequence longer than itself, adding up to 206 nucleotides, an important stepping stone towards RNA self-replication. Now I want to juxtapose this with tropical storms. If you've ever gone onto the National Hurricane website, you see a tropical storm. One of the images is actually where the wind swath is. And that's like a place where if it was like a giant bottle of beer or soda and you shook it up and you cracked it open, at the surface you have low pressure and you have winds that are agitating the ocean. And what the Bates et al. Research in 2001 showed is that with Hurricane Felix, up to a third of the carbonation came out of the ocean. And if you imagine an ancient ocean before there were cells, just chemicals like nucleotides were in the ocean, those winds would whip up those materials as well, and would be kind of like seeding materials as droplets form. In fact, I've heard some people describe that a tropical storm smells a little bit like salt. You can smell it in the air when the winds come in. So these materials get picked up, and the nucleotides are capable of being both a feedback and a model. But the carbon dioxide is not. It's capable of being a model. It's just carbon dioxide all the time. But yet it's an acid, so it has this ability to affect the cloud microphysics and the rate of freeze in the context of electrical fields. So now, today, as nucleotides get sucked up by cells and aren't really freely available in the concentrations that existed in the ancient oceans, all that's left is the carbon dioxide that is involved when the surface low is agitating the oceans and going up into the clouds. So this is the fundamental mechanism for modulating or dampening not just storms and lightning in the global electric circuit, but then ultimately the Earth's magnetic field. So I want to kind of juxtapose this a little bit. There are papers that are looking at how tropical storms have these electric fields, and they're complicated papers. It's hard to summarize them and be helpful, but it's kind of like an amoeba. How does it work? Try to put one together. It's very difficult, and that's where this complexity comes from over time to solve these difficult problems. But one example is the W.P. Peter and U.S. Einen paper that was in the Journal of Geophysical Research, volume 16A 503 DOI 10, 1029 slash 20043A0899 2005. It's entitled Electron Precipitation Events Driven by Lightning and Hurricanes. That's how I found it, as I just typed that. And it's talking about these low and very low frequency electrical signals that are occurring around and about a hurricane, in this case Hurricane Isabel, and they looked at a couple others, as it passed between a station in Boston and then the Bahamas. And these low frequency events occurred as the storm passed. So it's kind of like the acoustics of it. Again, this is an example of a very complex paper talking about this and describing it, how tropical storms have this electrical complexity, and that's where the modulating and the dampening has occurred since the beginning of life. But let me also give you another example, and I think it's also helpful, and that is a phenomenon called the QBO, the quasi-biennial oscillation, which is a wind at 30 and 50 millibars. And this wind has been correlated with whether you're going to have a busy tropical storm season in the Atlantic. Well, how does this wind work? If you look at what the profile of this wind is right now, it looks like this. Current QBO condition, and it's out of Singapore. And again, I'm not sure to what degree you can pick my screen up, but the idea is that at 10 millibars, it's moving in the east direction, and then as you go to 30 millibars where it starts to move at the westerly phase, and then all the way down to 70 and 100 millibars. And the weird thing about it is that it reverses from the lower pressure. Well, what's at the lower pressure? At the lower pressure, as you get up into up to 150 miles up above the sky is the ionosphere. And this is the part of the atmosphere where there's a lot of charged particles. And if you have an ion moving, that has a lot to do with the state of the Earth's magnetic field. And if it reverses, it doesn't immediately change the direction of the higher pressure and the denser air below it. It takes time for that movement in that one direction to switch that wind. And then when it reverses from the top up, and you have the same time period for it to take. It takes time for the wind to start to reverse. So what's fascinating about this is it's another way of saying that the state of the Earth's magnetic field, which way it's going, tends to favor formation of tropical storms or not. And that then becomes another way of saying that tropical storms are electrical, and how the electrical state of a tropical storm helps it to stack and vent. And it's this idea that just like negative charges, it takes energy to put more negative charges together and more positive charges together, and then negative and positive charges are attracted and annihilate each other. The same is true about air pressure, that strong high pressures it takes energy to compress air, and then it takes energy to make a vacuum, and then a vacuum and a high pressure are attracted to each other. And what holds this relationship together is water, which is of course part of convection, but it's also a very powerful dielectric, meaning that electrical fields have trouble moving through water. And so you have these physical phenomenon that is being controlled by life. And now as this process has become more complex, carbonation levels in the nearshore ocean, rivers, what flows down rivers, how much carbonation it flows down rivers, what life is in the nearshore ocean, all these different things start to be part of this living Earth process that's much different than the random inputs or the chaotic inputs that go into the climate system. All right. Have a great 4th of July. God bless you all, everyone. Good luck.